I'm Mark Byford, otherwise known as the Thebowlerhatfarmer on social media. I first got my baptism of fire in farming at 5 years old when Grandad put me on the back of a cow and smacked the backside of the cow and sent me off down the field on my own. So I've been in and around the food and farming side for a long time. Quite a bit of knowledge of what's going on, in my opinion, of what's really going on. And now starting to see how the government are picking at certain aspects of farming, whether that's taking away the land or, however they're doing it. Inheritance tax especially, that's one of those things that, the government seems to think that only 20% of farmers are going to be affected, but when you actually do the maths on it, it's more like 80%. And yes, while there is tax breaks in there and people will tell you you've got 10 years to pay that tax, the problem is that with farming, the profit margin is so tight. And just to give you an idea, on the main farms, they're probably working on about 1 to 1.5% return on their investment. And obviously if you're on a bigger farm and, if you've got, let's say 500 acres and you're, where we are in Suffolk, you're sitting on potentially 20 to 25,000 pounds an acre. So if you're sitting on millions upon millions of pounds worth of physical assets, but they have no tangible value to you unless you're going to sell them. So the investment, what you make for the equipment, make for the seed, the sprays and chemicals and everything else. Not that I personally agree with that, but that's most farmers, that's the way they're farming these days. That then leaves a very small 1% profit margin, which does not leave room for tax to be paid. That's for sure. No. So I think what's got to be the reality in this is that, in my opinion, they need to address the tax. I don't think for 1 minute they will, because I believe it is a land grab. And that's basically how I see it.
Well, look, could you just take us through a bit of the economics of farming? Because I know certainly during the Second World War and even after the Second World War, central government in Westminster took farming very seriously. They thought it was extremely important that this was a stable industry, that families were able to continue to pass on land, make a reasonable amount of money and feed the country. So what's the situation now?
Completely the reverse, Tony, is the simple answer. The government doesn't believe we need farmers. And if you go back through history, which I'm sure you like me have, this is really, whether it was, Mao or Stalin, they've all used this technique to bring in communism, where they take away the weapons from the farmers, weaponize the public against the farmers, which is what we're seeing at the moment. It's a dark time for farming, to be honest, Tony. To be looking now at the real monetary side of farming. I'll give you an idea of where my views are on farming, especially on the big farms, because I don't think big farms work anymore. They've had their day and don't work. The problem is, if you grow, like where I am in Suffolk, we predominantly have 5 main crops. So that's either going to be wheat, barley, sugar beet, maize, or it's going to be rapeseed. Well, we're not supposed to eat rape oil anyway because it's carcinogenic. We definitely don't need the amount of sugar we're containing. Wheat is going into the food industry in the realms of food production. So if I look around East Anglia these days, Tony, we don't actually produce any physical food anymore. And I say food meaning fruit and vegetables or meat. Everything else is going into the processing system. So just to give you an idea, most farmers, by the time they've paid for everything, a ton of grain or sugar beet or anything else won't earn much more than £10. So if you get 4 tonne an acre, let's say, you're going to earn £40 an acre. That is not a lot of money. Now, the reason I look at it from my side and say this style of farming's now redundant is because on an acre of ground growing vegetables, and with vegetables, obviously, you can put several crops in over the top of each other. With wheat, it's a 12-month process. And with vegetables, farmers can earn up to £30,000 to £40,000 an acre if they've really got good nutritional soil. Now, yes, they have to work on getting the nutrition back into the soil, but there's definitely better ways to farm. And I think, if farmers were in the process that they were earning, thousands of pounds an acre rather than £40 an acre, the inheritance tax would not be an issue. The problem we've got is that agriculture at the moment, as it sits and how it's been done, it is a problem.
Well, look, let's just look at the costs that are on farmers. Back in the day, I mean, you would have, I guess, horses, you'd have labourers living on the farm to work, so the cost wouldn't be that much. They might not even be paying for electricity if you go back between the wars. But so what is it on the cost side for farms that's increased so much?
Well, if you look at the kit now, I mean, just a combine. Now, bear in mind, you use a combine for about 10 days a year. The new John Deere combine, which has just come out this year, is 1.2 million. Well, you've got a, when you're looking at turning a farm to earn 1% profit, that doesn't give you a lot of scope to pay for a 1.2 million pound combine. So everything's financed, everything's been strung along with the bank. So the whole system is there designed to keep farmers in the system. So whether they're part of the food supply chain directly to one of the supermarkets, or, whether that's into one of the packing houses or into one of the processing plants, they're still within the system, and they can only get their funding if they're part of the system. So farmers are terrified to step away from the system and start looking to grow something that they could potentially, let's say, sell direct to the public, which I think is where farmers need to be looking more now, is on that side. So, yeah, it's an interesting time.
And what about, the getting paid? Mostly, of course, this money's coming, I think, from, most of us buy our food in supermarkets. So that's, I guess, where the farmers are getting their money from.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the big farmers are into contracts with the supermarkets and the pack houses and the, food production companies. And they're always been screwed. So what's happened is, Tony, just to give you an idea, after the war, they bought out the subsidy side through Europe, and that worked very well to pay the farmers to produce food very cheaply to be able to supply to the public at a reduced price. Now, it worked very well for the big landowners and not so well for the small landowners that actually took better care of the soil and better care of the food they produced. Now, over the years, obviously, since we've come out of the EU, that's now been reduced to zero. That then causes an issue, because what's happened is, in the time that the subsidies were in place, the subsidies were paid direct to the farmers to produce that food cheaper. Over the time, what the supermarkets have done is, because the farmers were getting that discount from the government, that allowed the supermarkets to push the prices down and down and down and down. And not with so much then major problem to the farmer, because they were still getting their subsidies through the government. That's now stopped. The government has stopped the subsidies. The farmers are now being squeezed by the supermarkets still. And now there's no money left in the kitty. Something has to give. The problem we have now is, how do you get the general public to give an extra 50% to pay for the food, what they need to buy? And that is the reality of what needs to happen. Food prices need to go up by 50% at least to cover the shortfall farmers are now facing. And that isn't going to go well with the public. The government knows that, so the farmers then take it on the chin. The farmers are then getting pushed more and more and more by the government to buy taxation. We've seen fertiliser prices go up from a couple of £100 a tonne to almost £1,000 a tonne. When I was little, I'm going back 50 odd years now, but when I was little, Grandad would keep all the seed from whether that was the wheat or the potato crop. We would keep our own seed. We would make sure that we were then in a position that we'd got seed for the next year. That doesn't happen anymore. Farmers just sell everything and buy the seed in. All the seed now has been GMO'd by the likes of Bill Gates companies. And that is now, so the farmers are being pushed more and more and more from every solitary angle. When Grandad used to keep the grain, there was no real cost to it because it had come out of the grain they produced. Now they've got to buy seed in at, hundreds of pounds a tonne, then it just doesn't stack up.
I mean, surely for a farmer, Mark, it makes sense to keep the grain from last year, especially if they're pushed financially. They could go back to doing that, can't they?
They're not allowed. There's so many implications on the farmers now with DEFRA's ruling for them to be able to actually physically keep that grain and produce from it. That goes against now everything what's in place. I mean, we've seen the agricultural policy really, Tony. Now, it doesn't exist. There isn't one. We don't have any real good plan in place. Everything DEFRA does is done with the intention, and I have to say intention, Tony. I genuinely mean that, because I cannot believe with some of the things I see that DEFRA do that it cannot be by just genuine mistake. I can only think it can be deliberate, because I can't believe there can be that many incompetent people in government.
Listen, you need to use your imagination a bit more. But look, surely the obvious thing to do is to convert the farm into a business, a company, register it at Companies House, and then you don't have to pay the inheritance tax. You can just add, say, for example, a son or a daughter onto the board of the company, and there's no implication tax-wise for the inheritance tax.
Well, no, there isn't on inheritance tax, but you then pay the corporation tax anyway. So what is a better system is to put the farm into a trust. That's a much better system, I have to say. This is something I've studied intently, and if it was down, if I had a farm what I was handing down, I don't, but if I did, then I would definitely be putting the farm into a trust, and I would be then making sure it's completely outside the taxation system. And this is the problem, I think, and that's something that most farmers don't have the time to study. Most farmers don't have the time, to be looking into paying a solicitor thousands of pounds to set up trusts and, what's the implications of it. I've been blessed that, I've spoken with so many people about the trust side who I've interviewed for my channel, that I've ended up, with a lot more knowledge about it and a greater understanding of it. But, your average layman farmer doesn't have that knowledge. And sadly, I have to say, I think we are, Tony, going to see a lot of farmers come out of farming in the next 18 months that will give up of their own free will, because they won't be able to see another way out. They will take the handkerchief what's been offered to them full of money, and they will run with it. Yeah, and I think that's really sad, because...
Yeah, it is because, this is a tradition which has actually been going on for not just centuries, but thousands of years. I mean, do you think we've seen governments tinkering with this? We've seen, obviously, there were things like the famine in Ukraine that was caused by government tinkering with the systems over there back in between the wars. And there have been famines. Obviously, there was a horrific famine in Ireland as well. I wonder if the tradition of passing the same piece of land on through the family, owned by an individual, is replaced by the idea of corporates, trusts, this sort of thing, starting to own the land, that there's going to be a complete change ultimately in the character of the countryside and the food we eat.
100%. And I will say on top of that, I think we're going to see, if we continue down the road we are, and I pray to God we're not going to continue down this road long term, but I think that some of the information that I'm being filtered through at the moment about some of the solar farms which are going in, we're going to see a detrimental impact to the countryside like we've never witnessed. They worry about, chimney pots going up, and people say, oh God, they built another 50 houses in that village. You wait until you can't see a piece of green anywhere and you can just see solar panels. What I do see, Tony, is from my side, if I cut across here to the other side of the farming side, for me, I believe that we need smaller farms. We need to go back to family-run farms on a grand scale. We need to grow back to growing organically. We need to go back to growing locally for people, and we need to go back to eating seasonally. And I think what we need to get farmers to understand is that the public, I'll give you an idea. I did 2 speeches last weekend, and there was 500 people at the 2 speeches, and I asked the 500 people one question. If you could buy chemical-free food direct from farmers, what would the answer be? 500 people out of 500 people put their hands up. That, to me, says there is a demand for the food that the farmers can and are more than capable of producing. However, they need to change the way they farm. So they need to come away from the big pharma, chemicals, pesticides and all of that side, need to go back to organic growing. They need to go back to growing food on farms, what people actually want to buy. I don't know about you, Tony, but I've got no desire to buy a ton of sugar beet or a ton of wheat, which is, all we see about where we are. People need to go back to producing food they can sell direct to consumers. And that would knock out the supermarkets, knock out the processed food. And it would also drop the shares of people like BlackRock and Bill Gates, who have a vested interest in my belief, to bring the food and farming side to a standstill.
Well, they seem to, definitely. There was this meeting just after, this is in Downing Street, just after Reeves's budget, where she announced the hike in national insurance for businesses, which has been a disaster for many marginal businesses, as well as the inheritance tax for farmers. So Larry Fink is sitting in there with Starmer and Reeves in Downing Street, and then they announced that there's going to be a special unit now of BlackRock with an office in the Treasury. So it seems to me that the private equity firms are much more involved in this than we might realise. Do you know much about them? People like BlackRock. What's their interest in all this?
I tell you what I think it is, and bear in mind that, you know, from their point, they're an investment body. That's their job, is to earn money for their shareholders, and that's what they're going to do. They don't care about, you know, Bob down the road who's had a farm. You know, the family's owned the farm for 5 generations. That's not their concern. Their concern is earning money. The biggest thing, what is the threat to the farmers in this country, and they don't realise this yet, in my opinion, is the new green initiatives. The green agenda is a dangerous agenda. It's all built around insufficient knowledge of poorly put together facts that are mostly, you know, I would say bordering on lies, or, you know, conspiracy theory style, really, because you look at, you know, I was at a council meeting and I asked a group of councillors, could they tell me what the amount of carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere, if they were, you know, so hell-bent on, you know, us getting rid of cars out of the towns and everything else. And I said, could you answer? And one of them said, oh, it's 20%. And another one said, well, I think it's 15%. And I said, well, it's actually 0.04%. And it goes to show, when it's on the government website, and, you know, it's stated on the government website what it is, that you lot don't even know the answer. And, you know, yet here you are making decisions on the town people, and don't actually know the facts. Because we know they're not paid to know facts. They're paid to do a job, and they're being paid by the government to deliver the green agenda, which is pulling the countryside to bits.
Yeah, well, it doesn't sound all that green to me. And I can remember dealing with Robin Page, who was actually not far from you. He ran a charity called the Countryside Restoration Trust, where he was showing how easy it actually is, particularly for organic farmers, to work extremely closely with nature and to do all this sort of thing without having to take land out of production. Just
100%.
sort of, yeah. So, but anyway, he was nobbled. Basically, he had his charity stolen off of him by imposters turning up as, you know, he thought they were his friends, turning up as trustees, that they then turned on him and kicked him off the board of his, and he died shortly afterwards, very sadly. But I mean, you do have this kind of myth, don't you, that the farmers are bad for the environment. But that is justified when you think about things like spray drift and all these chemicals that are being used nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't agree with that style of farming. It's not a style of farming that I want to be part of, or that I ever really have been. And I think what we need to do is get farmers to understand that if they go back to farming what I deem as traditionally how their grandfathers would have farmed, then there's a massive scope for them to fit inside the realms of what the government's looking for. If I give you a classic example, I'm just sat at my cousin's farm at Jubilee Farm in Great Barton, just outside Bury St Edmunds, and it's a council farm. My cousin got given it about 18 months ago by the council. It's a regenerative farm, and I mean what I deem as 100% properly regenerative. He's growing food, he's got animals, he's setting lots of trees, including orchards. He's gone completely back 100 years in farming. And the food they produce and the quality of the food they produce is second to none. And this, to me, is where we should be looking to go. One thing I do see happening, Tony, I've got to be honest about this, and I'm seeing a lot of call for this via my social media now, is a lot of people are starting to put together community projects, whether that's under the realms of CICs, whether that's under the realms of just the village getting together and growing on the allotments. And what I think we're going to see a lot in the future, because of the amount of food you can produce on a very small amount of land, let's say that's vegetables or meat, I think what you're going to see is a lot of these big farmers giving up certain areas of their farm for the local community or people within inside the community who want to grow food to actually work on a few acres of that farm to actually produce local food. And that's something we're now starting to see a lot of. I was privy to a conversation the other day with Tim from Pro Farming, and Tim was saying that, you imagine if every farmer across the country gave up just an acre of land and the public farmed it, how much food we could produce. And it's just shocking how little land we actually need if we go back to really good quality, densely nutritional soil. We can grow 10 times the amount of food what we do now in a small area. So I think there's a lot to be said for the way farmers have farmed. Needs to, in my opinion, needs to be pushed to the side now. We need to get farmers to start to understand we need to put manure on the land rather than nitram. We need to let nature look after the insects. We used to have thousands of birds when we were kids. We don't hardly see the birds now. And we need to get those back. The natural habitat needs putting back in place. When we were kids, Tony, certainly in the village we live in, we had about a dozen ponds, all got filled in over the years. And now I'm gradually seeing the farmers starting to put wet areas of fields where they'd originally had a pond or a low-lying area, are starting to put ponds back in. They can easily have trees put around them. Farmers could put fruit trees in. Yes, if you believe that there is a carbon issue, that could be, you could offset your carbon against proper trees, whether that's willow trees to soak up water on the side of riverbeds, or if that's fruit trees to produce food, which we so desperately will need on this little island of ours.
Yeah, there's also another issue involved in. That sounds a bit sort of, kind of a little bit of tinkering going on. That sounds good. Obviously, little good initiatives, but no big changes. We've seen 4 in December, January, February, March as well now. Massive protests in Whitehall. And you said something quite interesting, I thought, that you didn't attend the protests because you didn't think they were actually going to achieve much, or if anything. So how are things, do you think, going to change, Mark?
Well, let me take you back a step. I went to the first protest. I took a coach load of people down from Bury St Edmunds. We went down for the day. And within about 20 minutes of being there, Tony, I quickly realised that the whole day had been hijacked by the NFU. They put various speakers on the stage that had, the agricultural policy for Labour and Conservatives was not worth the paper it was written on. The only people who had any idea under the agricultural policy was Reform. And they wouldn't let Nigel on the stage, although he was there. We saw all the speakers, what should have been on stage, not on stage. So I decided after that I didn't need to be there because, I kind of messaged everyone and said, look, I've seen enough, I'm going home. We were there about an hour and a half and we left. And I was really sad about that because, we've gone down there to show our unity with the farmers and to show them that, the support is there from both the general public and other farmers and people like myself who, are lucky enough to have a platform. And then we kind of see it slip away. And then the other events, what have happened since, have all been controlled by the NFU. So I think for me, the only way, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this issue with the government is one of two ways. The first one, I do not want to see under any circumstances, and that's some form of revolution. I think what needs to happen is the farmers just need to turn the food supply chain off, in my honest opinion, and that would wake the country up as a whole, not just the government.
Listen, a similar thing the miners tried, didn't they? If you're old enough to remember, in the 1970s and 1980s, and they were broken. They failed. They turned off all the power. I can remember sitting there in the evening with candles in the house because there was no coal to make any electricity. So you could try the same and get the same result as Arthur Scargill and the miners did.
Yeah, and I would probably say we would get the same result because the NFU are about as much use as Arthur Scargill was. I don't think the miners were the problem. I think the management at the top were the issue, and I think we've got the same thing again with the farming community have put so much trust in the NFU. And in my opinion, the NFU stands for no fecking use. It doesn't stand for National Farmers Union. So I think we're gonna have to see something big happen, Tony. Whilst we're seeing, like you rightly just said, we're seeing a lot of movement from the ground up. but we need to see something from the top down as well. A lot of farmers are making transitions, and this is my tour. What's now coming up, which I think I'm on the 16th, when we're down in Cheltenham, is the sort of, when a tour starts, and what we're starting to see is there is a lot of resistance to the government change. The inheritance tax changes. Is there enough? I don't think there is. I don't think that the farmers have got the belly for it anymore. I don't think that the public have got the belly for it. And that's really sad to say, because, this is, if we lose our farmers, we're done for. We're a tiny little island that the government seems to think we're going to be importing, 80% of our food in. Well, just ask yourself this question. Why have BlackRock this week announced that they're buying all the ports? If you want to control the food, you just need to control what comes into the country. And that's not difficult when 80% of the food's coming in across the borders.
No, and also, of course, this is what they call vertical integration. This is fascism, actually. It's where big companies decide, like Standard Oil did back in the old days, where they're going to control the oil wells, they're going to control the transportation, the refineries, the petrol stations, and they can charge exactly what they want. And the same is potentially true for food. There is one sort of light at the end of the tunnel, as I see it anyway, and that is that you've got worsening living conditions in the cities. I mean, we have mass urbanisation in this country, mainly in the 18th century, with the Industrial Revolution. And surely, what farmers could do with is actually a few extra hands out there in the countryside to help them to make a profit and to grow food. So I wonder, is there any leeway and scope, do you think, for people who are twiddling their thumbs or in absolute dead-end jobs in the city coming out into the countryside and getting stuck in?
Well, what I'll say is this. Yes, I do, but not under the present agricultural system. What I have seen is, and the reason I say this, Tony, I've had hundreds, literally over the past 6 months, hundreds of people, a lot of pensioners especially, that are sitting at home bored, saying, look, we're really concerned, Mark, we follow you on social media, we're really concerned about what you're saying about the food supply chain. Is there any way we can go and help the farmers? Well, the answer is, if they're growing fields of wheat or barley, no, probably not. However, as farmers start to make that transition back, in my opinion, to where they need to be to vegetables and meat, I think there is a place for the public to be involved. And I think that the public are ready for that. I just don't think the farmers have really got their heads behind it. Tony, we're looking at a minimum of a year to 2 years to be able to turn a farm around to do something else. But what I will say about British farmers they're bloody good at that. They're really good at it. I've worked on farms myself, when I was a youngster, and I've seen it on the farm I'm now living on, where one day we could be, farmers are the midwife, they're delivering, lambs. The next minute, 20 minutes later, they're fitting a new tap to a water pipe. The next minute, the electric's gone, they're sorting the electrics out. British farmers are the most resilient people. Well, farmers worldwide are the most resilient people, which, they keep getting knocked down and keep getting knocked down, but they always get up again. This is just, the IHT side of this is a tiny, tiny little aspect of what people genuinely believe is a big issue. I don't. I believe it's just a red herring and part of a much, much deeper agenda.
We've got this meeting coming up in Cheltenham. I think it's Sunday week. Yeah, it's the Sunday, yes. The 16th of March from 10 till 6, sort of day school thing, really. £15 entry at Shurdington Community Centre, Bishop Road in Cheltenham, GL 51 4TB. In a nutshell, what can people do you think? Obviously, it's a great idea to come together to learn about this, and there's a lot of people who will want to do that. But what can you just point listeners into various things they can do in order to assist the farmers in getting Rachel Reeves to sit up and take notice?
Yeah, I think there's several things. One, if there is a protest in your local area, go out and support the farmers. No matter what my thoughts are on the protests, I think what the farmers need is the reassurance the public are behind them. And I believe 100% the public are. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we need to start looking at coming away from the supermarket supply chain. We all know the people like BlackRock and Bill Gates and everybody are all shareholders in these things. I think we take the money away from them generally. So stop shopping at the supermarkets, find your local farm shops, find your local greengrocers, butchers, bakers, start spending your money with the small people again. That's my opinion.
And I also want you to gaze into the crystal ball. Are we going to win this one? The people and the farmers? Are BlackRock going to have to back down ultimately, do you think?
I'll tell you what I think, Tony. We don't have any choice, because looking at the 2030 agenda, if people generally want to go down the road of living in 15-minute cities and being fed whatever trash the government wants them to have, or it's not even the government, it's the shareholders of corporations what want them to have it, let's be honest, then they just need to do nothing. Otherwise, they need to stand up and be accounted. And I think now is that time for people to stand together with the farmers, start supporting the farmers. I say, things like this event, which is being put on by Kay down in Cheltenham, they're so important, and it's somewhere where the farmers can go and learn a bit more, and the public can go and find out what's really going on, and I mean really going on, and hear the in-depth side of how we can make changes together, and to look at how the public can, at these events, best assist the farmers to understand that the public do want what they do, but they might not want it in the format they do it at the moment. And if they change the format, the public would come to their assistance to also get involved in helping in the growing.
Well, look, you are called the Bowler-Hatted Farmer on social media, Mark. Can you tell us whereabouts we can find you, and maybe recommend a couple of other farmer channels? Because we're not getting any of this from the BBC.
Well, firstly, I think from my side, the bowlerhatfarmer.com. The Bowler Hat Farmer certainly on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. I'm on all of those, and TikTok under the Bowler Hat Farmer. Gareth Wynne Jones, who's based up in North Wales, is a hill farmer. He's definitely someone I would say to follow. Very, very good. Puts it really simply. And another one is Justin. He goes by the name of the Effing Farmer. He's another good one to follow as well, because again, these are both farmers. They're on the ground, they're doing the work, they're trying to make that change, and they're pushing to get people to support the farming community and to support the transition what needs to happen in agriculture.
Bowler Hat Farmer, Mark Byford. The event it's called Supporting Farmers for Food Security Symposium 2025, Sunday, March the 16th, 10 till 6. Doors open 9 a.m. £15 entry at Shurdington Community Centre, Bishop Road, Cheltenham, GL51 4TB. Thanks very much for joining us, Mark.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Tony.